Call this hearing to order. Actually, I have a real gavel here. Might as well.
Entitled.
There you go. I request unanimous consent that the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of committee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure that all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. I want to welcome everyone to today's Economic Opportunity Subcommittee hearing, where we're discussing military transition during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, our subcommittee will identify and examine issues service members may face during their transition from military to civilian life. Service members and their families face extensive changes during the transition process that affect nearly every facet of their lives. Transitioning out of the military goes further beyond just a few days of technicalities, seminars, and paperwork. It's a years-long journey that requires continually adapting and readjusting to civilian life. Through much of the Transition Assistance Program, or TAP, focuses on career readiness for service members. There's more to a successful transition than securing post-separation employment. Service members must navigate a new civilian identity and manage the mental and emotional changes that arise from leaving the military. These challenges have been exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, which presented unforeseen challenges to every American, and certainly includes all of our veterans. Leaving the military brings with it a large amount of uncertainty, and the pandemic is an added stressor for transitioning service members and their families as they navigate a web of services and resources. At the beginning of this pandemic, the federal agencies that coordinate TAP quickly pivoted their curriculum and services from in-person to online platforms in accordance with CDC guidelines. However, some service members reported confusion and inability to access transition resources throughout the pandemic. VSOs and other community nonprofits, many of whom are represented here today, and it's great to see you, they have stepped up to help fill the gaps in the delivery of resources to assist transitioning service members. As our country and as the economy continue to recover, equipping our service members with the tools and the opportunities they need for a successful transition is vital. Today, we'll examine the effectiveness of TAP during the pandemic and discuss changes that can be made to improve this critical resource for service members and for their families. Improving and strengthening TAP has long been a priority for this committee. The John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 brought sweeping changes to TAP and made it more of a personalized resource for service members transitioning out of the military. Earlier this year, my legislation, the Johnny Isakson and David Rowe Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act, was signed into law. This expansive legislation consists of dozens of bills, including the Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer Bill Mulder Transition Improvement Act that I introduced with my friend, Representative Jody Arrington. The Mulder provisions mandate several improvements to transition resources in the short term and require the VA and its federal partners to assess and study TAP, which will provide us with vital data that we can use to further strengthen this program in the long term. Today, we'll hear updates on the implementation of the 2019 NDAA and the Mulder provisions from the DoD, the DOL, and the VA. Lastly, I'm excited to see many new faces that are testifying before this committee today to offer their perspectives on the obstacles service members and their families face during their military to civilian transition. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Moore, for any opening remarks he may wish to make. Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for holding this oversight hearing and our witnesses for being here today to testify on one of the most important programs the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunities oversees. The Transition Assistant Program, also known as TAP, is a vital program designed to assist our servicemen and women who are transitioning out of the military into the civilian life. It is clear that a successful transition sets up service members for long-term success in the civilian sector. I'm interested in hearing today what challenges the COVID-19 pandemic has imposed on TAP and how Congress can help empower those testifying here today to overcome those challenges. As we all know, COVID-19 has changed many aspects of our lives, and the military is no exception. In the spring of last year, TAP classes were forced to move to a fully virtual platform, taking away from the value added with the in-person instruction. While I want nothing more than to see TAP classes move back in person, we must take into consideration that this is a global problem and program, not just something that takes place in the continental United States. What is safe at Fort Rucker, Alabama, may not be safe in Europe. With that being said, we need to hear today how DOD, the VA, and the DOL plan on moving back to in-person instruction as soon as possible, but in a manner that keeps our servicemen and women safe. I also have questions on if the virtual format will continue to be an option for service members moving forward. Congress also has a responsibility to see how COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the recent changes that were made to TAP in the FY 2019. NDAA, as well as the Johnny Isaacson and David P. Rowe, MD Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act of 2020. I'm also interested to see how TAP's tier system that provides more individualized training to service members based on the need is working. Are service members being placed in the right tier? Do we have a stronger correlation between the completion of TAP and a successful transition? Those are the kind of questions I hope to receive answers today. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I think you would agree with me that when I say that successful transition into civilian life reduces so many different risks for our service members, with suicide and homelessness being two of the most concerning. 20 service members and veterans die by suicide every day. That is why getting this program right is so vital to the mental health and well-being of our military and our veteran population. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. Now you'll back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member, and I absolutely do agree with you on that, Ranking Member Moore, and also would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to our friends back at Camp Pendleton in California who do a terrific job with TAP. I had a chance to visit with them not long ago and look forward to doing so again soon. For our first panel today, we'll hear from representatives from veteran service organizations. Great to see you all. First, we have Vivian Richards, Program Manager for Minority Veterans of America. Hello there, looking at my screen here. There you are. Good morning. Next, we have Dr. Michael Haney, Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovations at Syracuse University's Institute for Veteran and Military Families. Good morning. There you are. After that, we have Jennifer Dane, Executive Director of Modern Military Association of America. Good morning. After that is Captain Matt Stevens, Chief Executive Officer of the Honor Foundation. Good morning, Matt. Nice to see you. I'd like to give a special introduction to Matt, who is joining us today from the Honor Foundation's headquarters in my district in San Diego, California. And Matt graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1991 and graduated basic underwater demolition SEAL training in 1992. He completed 10 overseas combat deployments in both Iraq and Afghanistan across 26 years of active duty service before retiring from the Navy in 2017. Matt has since applied his many years of leadership and team building from the Special Operations Forces to improve the future of transitioning veterans in his current role as CEO of the Honor Foundation. And I've had the pleasure of meeting with Matt and his team to learn about their program, and I was very impressed, and it's great to have him here. And in true soft fashion, they're earnest in their pursuit of excellence for the best transition program. So thanks again for joining us today, Matt. Next, we have Carolyn Lee, Executive Director of the Manufacturing Institute. Good morning. And finally, Patrick Murray. He's a subcommittee veteran, and it's great to see you. Legislative Director for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. With that, I'd now like to recognize Ms. Richards for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Vivian Richards, Sergeant Major retired United States Army, and a volunteer program manager for Minority Veterans of America. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today. Somewhere in the process of my transition, I heard someone say transition is trauma. I transitioned out of the Army in September 2020 after 20 years of faithful service as a soldier in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm employed, housed, and alive. These three categories are the baseline metric for success in a veteran's transition. But I count it as a point of privilege that I am all three, and I also know that it will be a constant battle to remain so. I would like to walk you through my final year as a soldier. September 2019, I was recovering from the onslaught of my attacker during my 2018 deployment to Afghanistan, as I received orders to my final duty station. By November 2019, my mental and physical health began deteriorating, and I had chronic pain, recurring nightmares, and struggled with maladaptive thoughts. By February 2020, I was diagnosed with a conversion disorder and could no longer use my legs. When the pandemic shut everything down, I fell through the cracks of an already strained system. From June to July 2020, I was in the military wing of an inpatient facility that was the only care option available to process the overwhelming and compounded trauma ravaging my body. Due to COVID-19, the overall quality of the program had significantly deteriorated. No concessions or changes were made to ensure that I was being supported in the manner that I deserved. By August 2020, I began terminal leave, and on September 30th, I spent my last day as a soldier. There were no dental appointments or retirement physicals. Instead of retirement awards and certificates, I left with 90 days of prescription medications and a box of my personal belongings. I didn't need the pomp and circumstance of a retirement celebration. I don't think most would say they did either. What we needed was substantive and nuanced support during the final period of our military careers. That never came. Military service is like a deep breath you take before getting punched in the gut. You draw in, you steel yourself, and you take the blow. Somehow you're able to get through the early mornings, the late nights, runs and rucks, long deployments, and all of the stress and glory that comes with military service. We're able to do it not because of existing support structures, but because we're trained to push our bodies beyond natural limits amidst a broken system that stigmatizes and devalues the support that we desperately needed. When I was diagnosed with my conversion disorder, my neurologist explained it by saying, the body breaks down when it's finally safe to. The end of my military career shouldn't have been an opportunity for my body to finally take the much needed rest that it had been denied during my career. My transition should have been instead, it was a great deflation. With 9 combat deployments, I've spent years of my life overseas. I served with pride and honor, and I was good at what I did. None of that guaranteed me a transition process that ensured I separated with the dignity and peace that our siblings in arms are promised and deserve. I'm not a unique case. There are many like me. Some are combat veterans, others survivors of military trauma, folks that were subjected to both systemic and personal violence and discrimination, many carrying the weight of physical and psychological workplace traumas. Many have honorable discharges and will be able to access the VA systems and frameworks when they figure out how to do so. But others have had their behaviors and actions criminalized and won't be afforded that opportunity. There are many that are in the same position that I was in, but don't have the opportunity to advocate for themselves as I am today. We are failing them, and we must do better. I'm grateful that this subcommittee is committed to working towards outcomes for transitioning veterans that extend beyond employed, housed, and alive. We must stop perpetuating broken systems that are designed to check a box and don't take into account our community's unique needs and situations. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your powerful words, Ms. Richards. I'd now like to recognize Dr. Haney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Moore, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide testimony this morning on the topic of military transition during the COVID-19 pandemic. I appear before you today in my capacity as the Vice Chancellor of Syracuse University, as a proud United States Air Force veteran, but principally as the Executive Director of Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families. The Institute was created a decade ago as higher education's first and still only interdisciplinary academic institute that is singularly focused on research and policy and programs that impact the nation's veterans and their families. The scale of the Institute's vocational training, business ownership, and transition programs makes the IVMF arguably the nation's largest nonprofit provider of vocational transition programs to the military community. Today, the Institute operates vocational and transition programs through the DoD Skill Bridge Authority that serve more than 60 CONUS and OCONUS military installations. All of our programs are privately funded so that they can be offered at zero cost to the military connected community. One example is a program called Onward to Opportunity that was designed to provide career skills training and private sector credentialing across more than 40 industry sectors where jobs are in high demand. This year alone, upwards of 11,000 transitioning service members and veterans have enrolled in the Onward Opportunity program. And over the past decade, more than 150,000 veterans and military spouses have leveraged the IVMF's programs to support their transition to civilian life. All of this is for me to say that the IVMF has positioned transition as central to everything we do. And that is because 10 plus years of research tells us that so many of the challenges that our veterans often face later in life have their origins in the transition experience. So if you take nothing else from my testimony this morning, it should be that, in my view, the first best use of resources directed to support our veterans is to invest in ensuring a successful transition to civilian life. In partnership with the Military Times, throughout the pandemic, the IVMF launched an effort to capture the lived experiences of COVID on members of the military community. And I would like to share how one veteran described her transition during the pandemic. And I quote, "I left the military right about the time that all the states went into COVID lockdown. The job I had lined up fell through, and suddenly I found myself unemployed, no medical insurance, no support. 2 months after separation, I had a major medical issue, and now over 75,000 in medical bills. I truly felt like when I left the military, my life, as well as the whole world, fell apart," end quote. Most simply, what we heard consistently is that the pandemic imposed new challenges on an already difficult process. From the pandemic polling with Military Times, far and away, the top reported challenge that we heard was reliable access to medical care. In addition, service members and veterans elevated financial and food assistance as a daily concern. During the pandemic, 41% of the community responded, citing the need for emergency financial assistance. 30% responded, citing the need for emergency food assistance. 25% of the community reported underemployment or unemployment that was driven in large part by lack of adequate childcare. 17% reported having to exit the labor market or reduce their work hours because of the inability to access childcare. Finally, many of the challenges posed by the pandemic disproportionately impacted veterans of color, who reported higher levels of need in every resource category that we surveyed, to include financial and food assistance, housing services, and community support. Also disproportionately impacted were military spouses. 42% of active duty spouses reported exiting the workforce during the pandemic. Over the past year, this committee has taken bold steps to enhance the transition experience. At the same time, the pandemic has highlighted and elevated new opportunity. And I'll highlight just 4 things very quickly. First, the opportunity to expand public-private partnerships in support of transition. The goodwill of the private nonprofit sector is under-leveraged in this regard. Second, we must do more to integrate community-based providers in the VA's health and social service interventions. Implementation of the Hannon Act Suicide Prevention Grant Program should, for example, leverage existing social service infrastructure in our communities. Third, our policy and programmatic efforts should extend more comprehensively to military families. Transition policy and funding must acknowledge that families and the veteran are inextricably linked. Finally, we must expand efforts to measure what we do. Without measurement and evaluation, there is no accountability to the veteran or the taxpayer. That concludes my testimony. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Haney. I now recognize Ms. Dane for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the House Committee on Veteran Affairs, Subcommittee of Economic Opportunity. My name is Jennifer Dane. I'm an Air Force veteran and the Executive Director of the Modern Military Association of America, the nation's largest LGBTQ military and veteran nonprofit. We appreciate the opportunity to be here to testify today on behalf of our 85,000 members, service members, veterans, families, caregivers, and supporters. Before I get into my testimony, I really want to talk about the 3 points and key recommendations that we have, not only that will assist with improving the TAP, but also the LGBTQ military and veteran community. While most of my colleagues on this call will recommend more comprehensive and robust plans for my community, I really want to go back to the basics. So my 3 key recommendations. Number 1, we must remove the barriers to collect research and analysis on the LGBTQ service members and veterans by eliminating the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness's approval in creating a standardized sexual orientation and gender identity as a basic demographic research question. That includes the DoD, DHS, and on all VA surveys. So what this would look like is that in TAP's program, and actually in the military in general, if we don't know who these people are, we cannot prepare. We cannot be prepared for even just figuring out as they transition into these programs what their basic needs are. And so this is really vital, and this has been a problem since LGBTQ service members have been in existence. Number 2, we must create a tailored experience for service members. And the comprehensive plan did create some opportunities for that. But what this would look like in our recommendation is providing specifically programs for LGBTQ service members so that they have a tailored experience to say, these are the needs we have. This could also be improved through women veterans and racial and ethnic minorities, just creating a standardized program that we can facilitate to make sure that we meet the needs of those and they're actually getting the most comprehensive plans. Number 3, we must establish comprehensive methods for connection and wellness beyond separation. We knew that the pandemic did nothing else but force us to recognize that we need more connection and more wellness. And this doesn't look like just reaching those touch points of once a quarter per year. This means actually the whole life cycle of a veteran. And what that looks like is reaching out to the rural communities, because we know veterans are there, but they don't have Wi-Fi accessibility. They don't have technology. How do we fix this? How do we make sure that we are creating this life cycle of folks that go beyond that? So we know that the LGBTQ service members, the pandemic served as a catalyst for those individuals because they were predisposed to increased hardships of higher education, job markets, issues with substance abuse, financial issues, homelessness, food insecurities, PTSD, and military sexual trauma. For our LGBTQ military and veteran service members, and especially those of racial and ethnic minorities, these are dire issues. Because we know that in 2020, the Government Office of Accountability has significantly highlighted the fact that we need to study some of these health outcomes, and TAPS would be a critical part of this, figuring out how to really understand the LGBTQ community. We've got to go back to the basics. We have to know who we're serving, because the lack of knowledge of assessing the LGBTQ service members who are transitioning out of the military creates an economic disparity that further perpetuates. So what this means is, because we don't know these service members who are coming into the military who are LGBTQ, this really impacts how we're serving them in the military, how we're serving them in TAPS, how we're serving them in the VHA, how we're serving them in VBA. And then when they go out to the community, we're not able to assess exactly what the needs are. And we know that they are that our community is more at risk than some others. So we need to create the tailored programs. So what this means is, we know that from 1993 to 2011, LGBT service members served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I myself was one of those. I served and I was investigated. And we know that many of our service members, we assess that there's about 870,000 that were serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and have these impacts. And these have caused stressors. So how do we fix this? We start with making sure that they are recognized. And this looks like this. We need to make sure that whenever they go from service to transitioning to the civilian life, that we really look at their conditions and make sure that they can transition out of the military successfully. Because when we create these service members, we must meet their needs from all aspects. And lastly, we need connection. Because of all of our health disparities in our community, and because of all these impacts, social isolation is seen more than most of our communities. So thank you so much for allowing me to testify, and I yield the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Stain. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Stevens for 5 minutes. Mr. Stevens, thanks for waking up early out on the West Coast to join us. You're now recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, members of the subcommittee. It's my honor to be here with you today to testify. I'd first like to thank all the members of the committee for your willingness to take meaningful action. Passage of the Chief Bill Mulder Transition Improvement Act of 2019 is a testament to your focus and perseverance. And it's critical that all elements of that law be enacted with no delays. On my way out of the Navy, I attended the Navy's TAP program, after which I attended the Honor Foundation's program, and THF, as it's known, was game-changing for me personally. The Honor Foundation is a national nonprofit founded in 2013 to help U.S. Special Operations Forces, or SOF, successfully navigate the career transition to find purpose and fulfillment in their next chapters of life. Our program consists of a 3-month executive education style curriculum where classes are run twice a week after work at night that combines classroom education, one-on-one coaching, industry mentoring, and access to a world-class professional network. All told, each participant receives approximately 120 hours of education and coaching. Now, we put over 1,000 people through our full 3-month program and helped close to 500 more through shorter seminars. Our graduates have a 95% fulfillment rate and obtain an average starting salary about 50% higher than those who do not attend our program. Now, the stress of transition does not discriminate based on age, rank, or time in service. In fact, based on a survey we conducted of the special ops community, 91% of them said transitioning from the military to civilian life is the hardest thing they've ever done, harder even than combat deployments and the long family separations. The stressful process has only been exacerbated by COVID-19, but I'm here to talk to you today about hope. I have a story of a 26-year Army Green Beret who in early 2021, after a year-long deployment to Afghanistan, and just 6 days before he was scheduled to return home, tested positive for COVID-19. He was isolated on base in country, then medevac to Germany, where he spent another 24 days in isolation with no physical contact with another human being. At this point, he was in a very dark place. His previous ability to compartmentalize the stressors of being in special operations started to fall apart. The effects of 80 months of combat deployments ignited. He returned to the US, decided to retire, received his retirement orders, and was assigned a retirement services officer, the first step in the TAP process. He has not heard from her in the 9 months since. Now, on the recommendation of a close friend, he applied for the Honor Foundation. And he said the best thing about being part of the Honor Foundation was that it provided him with hope. He's been a member of a high-stress organization for a long time, where he's unfortunately lost soldiers and friends to suicide. When he looks back on each of them, there's a common theme. They didn't have hope. But THF's program provided him a process by which he could move into the next phase of his life with a measure of optimism. And this is just one example of the numerous stories we hear every single day. In simplest terms, I would say the two most critical factors veterans face during transition are: number one, figuring out what they want to do next, and number two, figuring out how to talk about themselves and develop their own personal narrative. A few key lessons we've learned during COVID-19 and some recommendations. Number one, you have to start with finding your purpose or your why, even during the pandemic. Figure this out first and the rest will all make sense. Number two, an effective transition takes time, and that should start at least 12 to 24 months prior to separation. It doesn't happen effectively in a one-day seminar or in a one-week crash course. Number three, transition is a team sport, best accomplished with teammates of similar backgrounds and shared experiences, and with the participation and support of one's family. And number four, follow-up. It's critical to check in with the members as they approach the end of their active duty service, then again after they get out. It shows we value their service and we want to invest in their future. But from the chaos of the pandemic, I do believe we have some opportunity. We're at a point of inflection. It's been 20 years since 9/11, and we need to make meaningful change. If we don't act now, or we get it wrong, the repercussions will be severe: higher unemployment, higher suicide rates amongst veterans, and a bigger civil military divide. Now, we've developed a recipe that works extremely well, and we want to be a catalyst to help make the transition system better for every single service member and veteran who wants to help. I recommend that programs like ours serve as TAP validation for those that attend them. This would reduce the stress on TAP resources and build partnerships between our organizations. I propose that THF, in partnership with the Departments of Defense, Labor, VA, and this body pioneer a new era in content creation, more effectively engage transitioning service members. Finally, we offer to serve as a pilot program for this body to study as you research best practices, make informed decisions, then implement change to support one of our nation's most valuable resources, its veterans. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you again, Mr. Stevens. Appreciate all your good work in our community. And I'd now like to recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Moore. Thank you for having me here today. I'm honored to represent the Manufacturing Institute, a 501c3 workforce development and education nonprofit that works to grow and support the industry's skilled workers for the advancement of modern manufacturing. Manufacturing today faces a significant skills gap. We don't have enough people to fill the jobs we have. In fact, just this week, new Department of Labor data came out that showed we had 700,000 open jobs as recently as last month. Yet approximately 2,000 women and men transition out of the military every year, and many need assistance finding a new career that makes the most of their talents and supports their growth. After COVID-19 hit our country last year, the number of reenlistments increased substantially, growing from 83% in FY19 to 92% in FY20, according to the Wall Street Journal. And not surprisingly, job market uncertainty was the top factor behind the surge. As the committee notes, the pandemic intensified challenges for transitioning service members, making access to resources incredibly difficult. And yet this is at a time when transitioning service members needed the support offered through TAP more than ever due to the economic uncertainty. But at many installations, TAP did not have a contingency plan for virtual support for those transitioning. Many required transition classes were moved online or delayed, resulted in many service members being ineligible for SkillBridge because they were not aware of program conditions to participate before their expiration of term of service date. In addition, many transitional SkillBridge programs were unable to operate, including in-person training, fellowships, and internships, and those that could operate had fewer people to recruit. We identified and developed some workarounds for these problems at the Manufacturing Institute's Heroes Make America initiative. Heroes is a Department of Defense approved SkillBridge that provides integrated certification and career readiness training in partnership with local community and technical colleges to prepare transitioning service members, veterans, National Guard, reservists, and military spouses for rewarding careers in modern manufacturing. At the outset of the pandemic, we collaborated with our education partners to pivot most of our program delivery to online platforms or socially distanced environments within just a matter of weeks. COVID-19 also accelerated our deployment of fully remote learning for Heroes participants, proving that we can successfully deliver some certifications online. We launched our Heroes Connect platform, which allowed talent to network virtually with the hiring managers around the country and learn more from manufacturing companies themselves across the nation. Now, I'd like to offer a few recommendations on TAP and funding for SkillBridge initiatives like Heroes Make America as we emerge from the pandemic. I outline more of these in detail in my written testimony, but I'll highlight a few points. First, there must be more awareness about SkillBridge and everything it offers. TAP does more than just support those transitioning out of the service. It can be a phenomenal recruitment tool, assuring those considering a military career on the front end that they will have support when it's time for them to hang up their uniform. Initiatives like Heroes Make America utilize state and local grants to cover tuition costs for our certification training. However, many transitioning service members return to their home of record, impacting their ability to use funding from the workforce system to cover the cost of training. And of course, federal Pell Grant eligibility only covers programs consisting of at least 600 hours of training, even though many valuable manufacturing credentials that lead to good paying jobs require significantly less training time. Now, Heroes is just one example. Since its inception in January 2018, Heroes Make America has had a placement rate of 92%. Participants have found jobs at more than 250 companies in 39 states. Notably, 55% of our participants have no post-secondary education, indicating a strong need for support to position them for success in a career after their time in uniform. As you know, WIOA funds are currently allocated to the states and distributed at their discretion. This often includes limitations around the types of placement options, regional high demand lists, and geographic employment goals. One problem for the transitioning service members and military spouses is that they often receive their training virtually or in a different location than where they choose to relocate after the military, which may have different in-demand careers than where they are accessing WIOA funds and this makes it difficult for this to be a useful tool for them. So a few recommendations. Congress should change eligibility requirements for Pell Grants to allow more students to pursue high-quality programs in as short as 8 weeks. There should be a separate allocation of RIOA dollars that focus on the military community and opportunities for training for careers that are in demand, regardless of the training location. So thank you for having me testify today. Veterans are well positioned to succeed in the manufacturing career with the skills, talents, and training that are highly valued in the industry. We are hungry for these veterans to join our sector, and we need to strengthen those connections into the military in order to achieve this. As I said earlier, we have over 700,000 manufacturing jobs open just as last month and 4 million to fill by 2030. So these veterans are in great demand. The Manufacturing Institute is committed to helping today's American heroes become tomorrow's manufacturing leaders. I look forward to continued engagement with the members of the committee and your questions today as we work to strengthen veterans' role in the civilian workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Appreciate it. I now recognize Mr. Murray for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the men and women of the Veterans of Foreign Wars of the United States and its auxiliary, thank you for the opportunity to provide remarks on this important topic. The VFW's accredited service officers have been a resource for transitioning service members since 2001 and continue to provide assistance to these men and women during this difficult time of change. We provide pre-discharge claims representation at 27 bases around the country and are available for transitioning service members at the same time they receive their training in TAP. While the primary role for the VFW staff in the Benefits Delivery at Discharge, or BDD program, is to help service members navigate their VA disability claims, they are also able to assist with many other benefits and available opportunities. Last year, between individual meetings and classroom briefings, the VFW met with over 14,000 service members. Each person our BDD representatives work with is asked to complete a survey detailing their experiences through the transition process. From March 2020 to February 2021, the VFW collected 1,100 of these surveys from the individuals we served at our BDD sites. Some of the data was expected considering the unprecedented changes due to COVID-19, but other numbers suggest that there's still a lot of improvement needed within TAP regardless of the pandemic situation. While there was a slight improvement regarding the timely attendance of TAP, 40% of service members reported they're still not attending TAP classes at least 6 months prior to separation. Additionally, we were surprised to see almost 60% reported not participating in any of the 3 specific tracks that were incorporated into the 5-day program over a year ago. The VFW is greatly concerned some of these new mandates are not being adhered to. In March 2020, the United States was unprepared for the new and fast-spreading COVID-19 virus. In response, we witnessed TAP offices shutting down and furloughing VA benefits advisors who were contract employees. This left transitioning service members scrambling to adapt to not only a national crisis and changing environment, but in the midst of their exit from the military. The information we received from service members during this critical time of transition was that once they finally were directed to computer-based training, they found it was simply training just to check the box. The value was greatly diminished through computer-based training, which is not the same as virtual live presentation. There is no interaction in simple computer-based training as it is all automated, whereas a virtual live presentation allows for interaction and questions. The VFW believes any online TAP training moving forward should always be in a virtual live format, and in-person TAP should be the standard, with that online training being as a backup only. Also, any TAP resources need to always be on a public-facing website, not behind a firewall of a system requiring DoD credentials to access. While we understand the unprecedented nature of COVID, TAP classes were slow to respond to the evolving environment. Service members were giving links to follow on their own with no feedback or options for questions. 330 minutes of non-interactive computer training for employment fundamentals of career transition, 240 minutes for VA benefits and services, or 630 minutes employment track, employment workshop. This is an unacceptable solution for prolonged periods of time. Some installations recognized the shortfalls and reached out to our representatives and BDD teams to help fill the gaps. Over the past year, we have had officially been integrated into the TAP curriculum at locations to provide VA benefits briefings because the instructors were no longer there. Our teams taught VA benefits classes at Nellis Air Force Base, Joint Base Myers, Andrews, the Navy Yard, Anacostia Bowling, Annapolis, Camp Lejeune, and General Officer TAP classes at the Pentagon. We were also asked to provide supplemental instruction at other bases. At Camp Pendleton, we briefed the new Spouse Transition and Readiness Seminar. In San Diego, we briefed at the Veterans Transition Service. And at Joint Base Lewis McChord, representatives briefed the Navy Reserve Quarterly. And at Norfolk, VFW representatives provided benefits briefings along with the USO Pathfinders program. Now we're at a crossroads for the TAP program, with several of the offices closed or working under decreased operational capacity. As we emerge from this pandemic, transitioning service members hope to experience a robust assistance program. We believe it is extremely important for TAP offices to integrate accredited VSOs into their operations, not as a third-party entity, but as an integral part of the team. TAP offices need to welcome and embrace the partnership and knowledge accredited VSOs bring to the teams. Finally, after reading VA's testimony, it was stated they began their pilot program for virtual live training on March 8th, 2021. What was VA's Office of Transition doing during this whole time if it took them a year to pivot to using Zoom or Teams? Conversely, the rest of America adapted and began using Zoom within days. For VA, it took a year. This slow of a response was completely unacceptable and highlights that transition is clearly not a priority within VBA. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, this concludes my testimony. I'm prepared to answer any questions you or the subcommittee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Murray, as always. With that, I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the question portion of the hearing, and I'll start with Mr. Stevens. The fiscal year 2019 NDAA mandated that TAP begin no later than 365 days before separation or retirement. This was a welcome improvement, but I question if we went far enough in helping service members plan for their futures. I think I heard you reference this in your open, but Mr. Stevens, when is a good time to start preparing for transition?
Sir, thank you for the question. I believe the best time to start preparing for transition is shortly after one gets into the military and gets through their basic training, their basic MOS training, and then probably throughout every single professional development gate that they have, whether that's A school, C school in the Navy, or various similar schools as people get promoted. Because a well-educated soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine is a better performer. And one of the pushbacks I've heard from my former colleagues is that we don't want to advocate for people to get out of the military. I think that's not true, and that if you educate them best, they're going to serve better and then be prepared to get out and have a graceful transition and a successful transition when the time is right. And having a graceful transition and really putting into play soldier for life, sailor for life, Marine for life, SOF for life, really shows that the services care, and it's good for recruiting, it's good for retention, and it's really good for morale. So I think it's a career-wide journey, sir.
Thanks for that, Mr. Stevens. One of the Mulder bill provisions in the Isaacson-Roe Act directs VA to establish a transition assistance grant program by July 5th, 2021. The program would make grants to organizations that provide transition assistance services such as resume assistance, interview training, and job recruitment training. Mr. Stevens, I'll stay with you. How important is it that VA get this program up and running as soon as possible, and why?
Well, I think it's critically important to get it done as soon as possible because as I've read it, that it's a pilot program to then study the best practices. So delaying the implementation of a study, in my humble opinion, doesn't make more sense because there's time given to do the study, and we can iterate during that study if it doesn't work out the first couple times. So, we're at 20 years since 9/11. I think we're going to see more and more people transitioning out of the military as we pull out of conflict zones. And as I said in my testimony, this is only going to, the problem is going to get amplified soon.
Well, Mr. Stevens took the words out of my mouth. This is a pilot program, and it was designed to discover best practices. We don't expect it to be perfect out of the gate, but we have to get it up and running as quickly as we can. Ms. Richards, let me turn to you. In your written testimony, you mentioned that there's a technology gap between DoD and VA systems that can cause service members to slip through the cracks during the transition. Can you please explain how the technology gap can cause service members to get lost through the transition process and lead to negative outcomes?
Thank you, Chairman Levin. So the bluff of it is that if DoD is not actively tracking transitioning service members, where's the actual positive tech handoff, right? So a technological handoff is not just, hey, now all of a sudden VA can see your medical records or VA can see you in a system. It should include some sort of confirmation of receipt and some sort of active handoff. So if the VA is not aware that service members are, like in my case, departing from a inpatient facility within the last 90 days of their transition, there was no real substantive way for me to begin immediately getting medical care through the VA, right? So a lot of that handoff is the responsibility of the service member. And they're also at the major point of crisis. And so for me, my technological continuity was the VA crisis text window or chat window, because I could have it up on my computer screen and chat with a professional. But the hurdle of actually getting a scheduled appointment with an actual medical provider was just too large for me to even mentally tackle at that time. So putting that handoff back on the institution and not on the service member, for sure.
Thank you for that answer, Ms. Richards. And we're going to have to leave it there for my questions. I want to be respectful to all my colleagues that have questions as well. And I want to recognize my colleagues for questions and begin with our ranking member, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, this is a question for you. And by the way, Matt, I think you got the coolest flag on here today. Matt, can you tell me, I understand the difficult the DoD has to replicate your 3-month program, the transition program. What are some critical elements that you believe they should be trying to incorporate from your program into theirs that it would improve that transition process?
Thank you for the question, sir. One of the biggest issues veterans face when they transition out is loss of identity and loss of purpose. It's pretty clear when you're wearing the uniform what your mission is every single day. And I would say that's the number one issue. So the number one thing that can be changed is really focusing on that, helping people figure out what their purpose, what their why, what makes them tick as a human. Do that first, then get into all the tactical tools of resume building, compensation negotiation, and things like that. It is the most basic piece of what makes you happy. Do that, and then figure out how to talk about yourself as a veteran. Create your narrative so that you can communicate in the civilian world, because the skills do apply. You just have to change the language a bit.
Certainly they apply. I would agree with that. So thank you, Matt. Maybe we can help in that process. The next question I have, and Mr. Murray, and you touched a little bit on this, but could you please tell me a little bit more about your view on the death by PowerPoint, the version of TAP, and the true effectiveness of this modality? And also, what's your view on how long it took the VA to switch from to an instructor rather than just from a digital format?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Our view on how long it took, it was unacceptable. It took a year to pivot to Zoom. Right now, we're doing this as we speak on this platform. And as I said, most Americans were functioning on platforms like this within days. It took VA a year. It also, in their testimony, they also mentioned they had individual one-on-one briefings with about 16,000 individual transitioning service members. The VFW met with 14,000. We should not be keeping pace with VA. We're a much smaller organization on a fraction of the basis they are. That kind of performance is really not acceptable. It shows that transition just isn't enough of a priority within VBA. Curious to hear what VA's defense of why a fourth administration to elevate these priorities is, again, why it's not needed in their view, but we think transition needs to be elevated, needs to be made more of a priority. And on these bases, it is critical that virtual live is the online platform used going forward. Virtual live should also be a backup. In-person should be number one. But if there is a need for online, it should be on a virtual live platform.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time for somebody else.
I thank the ranking member for his questions. I want to recognize my friend from New Hampshire, Mr. Pappas, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the ranking member as well for conducting this hearing today. I think this is such an important topic. And I saw Ms. Dane nodding during the last comments about death by PowerPoint. And I think that's something that, a lot of folks can relate to. And I wanted to turn to you about the issue of LGBT veterans and service members. I thought you hit the nail on the head in terms of the experiences of these individuals, especially during the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era, and making sure that we are tailoring services and programs to meet them where they are and to meet their needs. The recommendations you had, I thought, were good about research and analysis, about tailoring programs, needing to make connections to a broader community to prevent social isolation, because we know that LGBT veterans do face issues like depression and thoughts of suicide at higher rates. And while our veteran population is diversifying, there is a great urgent need to make sure the transition programs are taking care of all of our veterans' needs. So I'm wondering if you could expound a little bit on what, if anything, works well today for LGBT veterans in terms of tailoring programs to meet them where they are, and if you have any specific suggestions on where we should look first for changes that could really make a difference.
Absolutely, and thank you, Representative Pappas. Our military, our LGBTQ veterans have faced many years of discrimination. I have to start out and say that we know that since World War II until the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011, we still have 114,000 veterans who are discharged dishonorably or other than honorably and still don't get benefits. It takes about 2.5 years for them to upgrade them. So just to say all that to say, I want to make sure that you know this is an issue that's currently happening for 114,000 of them. But what's going well? We know that there are great LGBTQ care coordinators that are at facilities, at VA facilities. Specifically, one of the key recommendations is to focus on the work of Dr. Tiffany Lang. Her work has been transformative, and she is a model LGBTQ care coordinator at Hampton Roads. And her work around the LGBTQ community, especially she just developed the research on the trans-narrative exposure therapy, is revolutionary, and it changes the lives of many members. And I think that looking at her work and the work of many other LGBTQ care coordinators at the VA is something that really needs to be happening. And one thing that we know also is that there's only one full-time LGBTQ care coordinator in the entire VA system, and that is her. And that needs to change. We need to make sure that we have care coordinators that are full-time at many other facilities. And we also need to recognize the intersectionalities that exist among all of us. So, that looks like creating programs that really reflect us. One of the biggest programs that the VA did was create the I Am Not Invisible campaign around women veterans. I want to see somebody that is LGBTQ that is in the VA, because not only am I a woman, but I'm also a lesbian. So what does that look like? I'm not represented in a lot of places. And I can assume that, other minority groups also feel the same way. And so it may not be just an issue for the LGBTQ community, but it needs to be a larger talking point. And so just that representation, start there. And if we can create a culture of creating a culture within the staff and within the services and within the VA, that's where you really start, is a cultural shift. And then we are all on board. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I have many other recommendations, but I'll yield the time.
It does. No, I think that's great. And it's good to know the work of Tiffany. And, I think there's some tremendous expertise across VA in a number of different areas, and helping to identify the work that's going on and sharing it across the system is going to be really important moving forward. So hopefully we can continue to highlight her work. Thanks for what your organization does Mr. Stevens, I'm wondering if I could turn to you in my remaining few seconds here. You talked about how transition is a team sport, and incorporating family is so important. How does your organization do that well, and what recommendations would you have to VA to pull in family members in the process?
Thanks for the question, sir. What we do is we open up our program to spouses and significant others, so they can pretty much attend every single class that we do for the transitioning service member, because it is a team sport and you need to have buy-in from the family. As you transition out, you get lots of different family dynamics. The service member may be at home more, you're losing your identity, lots of stressors. And so that's the number one thing I'd say you do is be inclusive.
Terrific. I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I'd like to recognize Representative Cawthorn, who I think is there, although maybe a little bit off camera. Representative Cawthorn, you there? All right, we'll come back to Representative Cawthorn, and I will recognize Representative Trone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. It's important, this transition piece. I want to talk today about mental health, which is, really a huge issue in our whole country and just getting more and more dire. This question is for Dr. Haney, but anyone else is welcome to chime in. What have you seen in the last year or so regarding the increase in the prevalence of mental health conditions among our service members who are transitioning to civilian life, and why do you see that?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think it's a very on-point question with regard to the topic of this hearing. As I mentioned during my testimony, we have consistently, along with Military Times, have been polling the military-connected community about their experiences with COVID. One of the significant findings is a significantly impacted mental health, decline in mental health among the community. A lot of it has a function of the format that we're on now. Mr. Stevens, I think, very well talked about transition as a function of identity, and I believe that to my core, that one of the things we really have to do if we're going to get transition right is think beyond jobs and careers and think about transition of identity, help folks essentially create a new self-narrative about their role in civilian society moving forward. That is very difficult to do when you have to engage via technology, when you don't have the opportunity, particularly to engage community providers. I think one of the things that as we look forward, the extent to which the existing mental health resources that exist in our communities where our veterans are transitioning to, where they live, where they work, where they're going to raise their families, how we engage that infrastructure, as opposed to simply creating, another VA program or framework that is designed to serve veterans, if you will, at a national level. We really have to engage our communities. Mr. Stevens also talked about briefly the divide that currently exists between civilian society and the military connected community. This is another way to get at that divide as well. Focus on how we deliver mental health interventions that are developed in our communities where our veterans live and work, and enacted, provided by your neighbors. The extent to which we can do that will not only serve the mental health situation of this particular community, but it will also serve to meaningfully invest our communities, our citizens, in the care and support of our veterans, those who have served on their behalf moving forward. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity that exists for us.
Let me get another question in. You spoke a little bit about incomprehensibly, it took a year to pivot to Zoom. Same time, we know telemental health has been a net positive for individuals looking for mental health care. it's just skyrocketed the attendance rates all across the country, telemental. And of course, when taking a year, not a good thing. So how is this COVID situation, the lack of telemental health for our service members, and how's it affected them recently, the fact that we did not pivot like we should have?
So I'll comment on the telehealth for only because we do have some data on it. Prior to COVID, based on the data that we've been able to collect, only about 5% of the community actually used telehealth services, whether telemedicine or telemental health. During the pandemic, that shift was pretty dramatic. About 30% of the community reported depending on telehealth, telemedicine, as in a way similar to many Americans. I think what we need to do now, and what VA, the opportunity for VA is now to look at the efficacy of that platform, leveraging the COVID experience. Does it work for this community? For some segments of the community, talking about, for example, veterans that live in rural communities, telehealth is, it is their only bridge to reliable care. For others, it may not provide the kind of support, because again, seeking healthcare is more than about addressing a clinical need. It's why many of our veterans, I'm sitting talking to you about, 1,000 yards from the Syracuse VA Medical Center. And many of the veterans that are cared for at the VA, they go there for social connectedness as much as clinical care. The extent to which the VA provides a forum for them to connect with other veterans, be part of a community, I think is important. And we have to understand how to balance telemedicine with that social connectedness that the traditional VA healthcare infrastructure provides.
Thank you very much for those responses. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Trone. I'd now like to go back to Representative Cawthorn. You're now recognized for 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. That genuinely means a lot. Mr. Rodriguez, my question is, what is the timeline for completing the memorandum of understanding so that the department can gain access to employment information from the National New Hires Directory?
Hi, sorry about that. I was having a little bit of time connecting here. So the time frame is still being worked out right now. We are looking at probably the second quarter of next year. We should have final numbers. We're still working through that MOU, still figuring out what data is the best possible data that we can capture to utilize and inform us to make sure that our programs are meeting the needs of our service members. But so I would say by end of Q2 at the latest, we will have a good solid start.
That's fantastic to hear. Well, as a follow-up to that, how will this information help inform the department on employment outcomes of TAP participants?
So we know that based off of data, we're going to be able to realign, if need be, some of our programs, some of our strategy and executing or the TAP program as well. We're going to continue to work with DOD and the VA to make sure that all of our programs are aligned to meet the needs of the service members.
Excellent, sir. Well, hey, thank you very much for your time. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Cawthorn. Do we have any other members that had questions of our first panel? Hearing none, I think we'll go ahead and conclude our first panel, and we'll now begin our second panel. We'll let everybody transition on the Zoom. All right. First, we have William Mansell, Director of Defense Support Services at the Department of Defense. I don't see Mr. Mansell just yet. Hopefully we'll see his visual here in a second. Next, we have James Rodriguez, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Veterans Employment and Training Service at the Department of Labor. Hello, Mr. Rodriguez. There's Mr. Mansell. Hello there. And lastly, we have Cheryl Rawls, Executive Director of the Outreach Transition Economic Development Service at the Veterans Benefits Administration. Nice to see you, Ms. Rawls, and thank you for listening in on our first panel as well. Appreciate that. Ms. Rawls is accompanied by her Deputy Director, Dr. Laurencia Pierce, and by Joshua Lashbrook, Assistant Director of Operations Support and Digital GI Bill Program Lead in VBA's Education Service. And we're grateful to all our representatives from VBA. Thank you all for joining the subcommittee today. With that, I'd like to begin with Mr. Manzel. You're now recognized for 5 minutes. Please go ahead and unmute yourself, sir. Yeah, committee staff.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, I think
You
we're
know,
good now.
it happens once every Zoom, Mr. Mansell. It wouldn't be a Zoom unless we had that happen at least once. So you're now
Thank you.
recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to virtually appear before you today with our colleagues from the Department of Labor and Department of Veterans Affairs. Like you, we are steadfast in our commitment to the well-being and continued success of our service members and veterans. This is even more important now, given the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, which, as you know, has highlighted and intensified the hurdles transitioning service members and their families face when preparing to transition to civilian life. At the beginning of the pandemic, we quickly learned that the coronavirus is dynamic and manifests differently by location, setting, population, and individual. As a result, our responses to COVID-19 were and had to be flexible, tailored, and incremental for each installation. The Department of Defense issued instructions to the armed services and department heads on how to respond to implications of COVID-19 on March 8th of 2020. Those instructions outlined a wide range of options to commanders and directors for decision-making in light of the growing situation and challenges presented by COVID-19. Over the past year, the DoD's Military Civilian Transition Office and the Transition Assistance Program interagency partners closely monitored COVID-19 impacts on the transition and reintegration populations and responded with flexible and tailored support. Before COVID-19, the majority of transitioning service members completed TAP in person. As installations closed and communities instituted COVID-19 protocols, we quickly adapted and evolved a TAP process originally designed around face-to-face interaction, personal connection, and the ability to network with peers. By the end of March 2020, nearly 100% of TAP classes moved from an in-person delivery to a total virtual environment, with many still virtual today. Initial counseling, pre-separation counseling, the individual transition plan, TAP core courses, two-day tracks, and capstone remain requirements for TAP. The services met and continue to meet those requirements through the various virtual and in-person TAP delivery platforms. When COVID-19 began, the department was in the process of developing a new learning management system known as Transition Online Learning, or TOL. TOL replaced Joint Knowledge Online in October of 2020. TOL provides a user-friendly learning environment for service members that enables family members, veterans, and caregivers easy access to all curriculum within TAP. TOL is a streamlined interface conducive to knowledge retention and application. The classes can be accessed at any time, 24/7, 365, via government or personal devices and with or without a common access card. As of April 2021, TOL has had over 320,000 individual course completions across the core TAP curriculum. The option to complete the Transition Assistance Curriculum Participant Assessment is also available through all methods of delivery. The participant assessment allows the department to evaluate TAP, the perception of TAP, and the quality of counseling and instruction provided. The assessment compiles participant satisfaction on the quality of instruction, content, facilities, and includes measures of participants' knowledge and the information presented during the training. Participation in the participant assessment is voluntary and anonymous. In calendar year 2020, over 193,000 transitioning service members became eligible to attend TAP. Of this population, over 67% responded to some portion of the assessment, providing valuable feedback on their TAP experience during the coronavirus pandemic. Service members' input concerning their TAP experiences indicated that over 80% agreed or strongly agreed to the following. They knew how to access relevant resources. The program helped them gain information and skills they needed to plan their transition. Their classroom facilities or virtual environments were adequate. TAP helped increase their confidence in transition planning, and the program helped to prepare them for their post-transition goals. Accordingly, supporting our warfighters and their families as they navigate the process of transitioning to civilian life has been and continues to be a top priority for the Department of Defense. The challenges presented during the coronavirus pandemic provided many lessons and opportunities for growth. As the nation moves to a new normal, the military departments will continue to evolve TAP in a way that meets the needs of each service culture. We will provide transitioning service members with the resources they need, both before and after transition, enabling them to become successful active veterans who reach their full potential and strengthen their communities. The department's success depends upon the continued strong collaboration with our interagency partners, the support and hard work of our military components, especially at the installation level, collaborations with other external stakeholders, and you, the members of Congress. So in closing, Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I thank the ranking member, and I thank the members of this committee for your outstanding and continuing support of the men and women who proudly wear the uniform in defense of our nation. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mansell. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Rodriguez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on military transition during the COVID-19 pandemic. As Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Veterans Employment and Training Service, I look forward to working with the subcommittee to ensure our veterans, transitioning service members, and military spouses have the employment support they deserve. I am humbled and honored to work alongside a talented and committed vets team, the department, and our partner agencies in this endeavor. America's veterans comprise one of our nation's most capable and resilient talent pools. It is incumbent upon us to continuously reimagine the demands of our time and strive to enable all veterans, transitioning service members, and military spouses to reach their full employment and career potential. The Department of Labor works diligently to ensure our American heroes and their families make a successful reentry into the civilian workforce. I cannot overemphasize the importance of the Transition Assistance Program. For many, the pandemic amplified the uncertainty of the military to civilian transition process. In response to the pandemic, vets pivoted from in-person TAP instruction to virtual services at installations worldwide. The department works with interagency partners and state workforce agencies to take necessary actions to continue to provide needed services during the pandemic while keeping our service members, veterans, and their families safe. From March 2020 to March 2021, vets conducted approximately 4,500 in-person workshops for 71,000 participants and 4,500 instructor-led virtual workshops for 83,000 participants. As the consequences of a successful or unsuccessful transition compounded over time, it is critical that we provide service members with the resources and opportunities necessary to get their transition right. In vets, one of our highest priorities in providing support and services to service members who are returning to civilian life. The pandemic has made this priority more urgent. As part of TAP, vets conducts a one-day employment preparation workshop, mandatory for all transitioning service members, and additional two-day workshops for technical career preparation and general employment preparation. Our TAP workshops are designed to help transitioning service members make the best career choices, considering individual skills, interests, and high-demand career fields. Several vets initiatives are underway or recently concluded to improve the transition experience and employment outcomes. Vets recently launched a monthly series of workshops known as a Transition Employment Assistance for Military Spouses, or TEAMS. TEAMS workshops, which are instructor-led and virtual, are designed to help military spouses plan and prepare for their employment goals. The department currently offers 4 workshops, and later this month will pilot an additional 5. The department is also developing a transition assistance curriculum to address the employment needs of wounded warriors. In coordination with key stakeholders, the curriculum will emphasize job accommodation resources so wounded warriors can realize their full potential in the workplace despite service-connected injuries. We intend to pilot curriculum modules later this year. In April, the department launched the Employment Navigator and Partnership Pilot at 13 installations. In addition to TAP workshops, Employment Navigators will provide transitioning service members and their spouses one-on-one career assistance outside formal instruction, where they will complete self-assessments, skill testing, explore career options in high-demand occupations, and connect with partners to identify other needed employment services. To assess our TAP effectiveness, the department is developing a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Health and Human Services, enabling DOL to use the National Directory of New Hires to analyze employment outcome data. By matching data with this directory, vets can analyze the most important factors for a successful transition to improve our effectiveness. In December 2019, vets established the Veterans Employment Challenge, which invited private sector organizations to compete to develop a job matching tool for service training or for service members and veterans. Eightfold AI advanced to the final phase to demonstrate its job matching platform and were declared the winner in September 2020. Vets is working with Eightfold AI and the department's Office of the Chief Information Officer to evaluate how the department can utilize the tool. Between April 2020 and March 2021, vets conducted an apprenticeship pilot at 8 military installations to offer transitioning service members and their spouses apprenticeship opportunities in industries and locations that match their interests. And during the pilot, apprenticeship pilot coordinators placed 82 transitioning service members and 3 military spouses into apprenticeships. Recent legislation extends and expands the authority to conduct an off-base transition training pilot. Our initial actions are to extend virtual TAP workshops to veterans and their spouses, leverage grant flexibilities to states most impacted by COVID-19, and staff contract employment coordinators in select pilot states to improve how they serve the employment needs of reserve component members. Throughout the past year, we have learned invaluable lessons. We will continue to prioritize our support of the military to civilian transition process and leverage our partners to enable our transitioning service members and military spouses to reach their full potential in the labor force. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to highlight the essential work VETS is doing to generate positive employment outcome for those who served our country. And I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I now recognize Ms. Rawls for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and other members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss how VA supports transitioning service members. As mentioned, accompanying me today from VBA are Dr. Laurencia Pierce, Deputy Director of Outreach, Transition, and Economic Development Service, and Mr. Joshua Lashbrook, Assistant Director of Operations Support and Digital GI Bill Program Lead for Education Service. The Transition Assistance Program has many champions across the federal government, as evident by our interagency governance structure, which was established in 1991 and refined by the Veterans Opportunity to Work Act. The federal community has come together to provide benefits information, counseling, and critical resources to service members and their families designed to support a holistic transition to the civilian communities and workforce. The collaboration is strong, as evident by our improvements in services for our transitioning service members in our VA TAP curriculum, our military life cycle training modules, and the development and implementation of the Women's Health Transition Training. As part of TAP, the VA Benefits and Services course helps transitioning service members understand how to navigate VA benefits and services to achieve overall well-being. VA benefits advisors are available for one-on-one assistance sessions, and transitioning service members and families can take advantage of several military life cycle modules that provide on-demand learning opportunities on VA benefits like education and home loans. The Women's Health Transition Training is an online, self-paced course that covers gender-specific healthcare services and enrollment. In response to COVID-19, VA piloted an instructor-led virtual VA benefits and services briefing between March 8, 2021 and April 16. We received positive feedback and now offers instructor-led virtual benefits and services briefings to all installations that have not reopened due to COVID-19. Additionally, we will leverage this virtual platform after the pandemic. Post-separation programs are critical. All newly separated veterans have access to mental health care right away for their first year post-separation. No pre-enrollment is necessary. This includes those with other than honorable discharges. The TAP interagency partners are committed to identifying and serving those who may be at risk for homelessness. We educate service members on available resources and refer them to appropriate federal programs that provide housing solutions, employment opportunities, healthcare, justice, and re-entry related services. We proactively seek to establish an early and consistent relationship with newly separated veterans through one-on-one interactions with our dedicated VA Solid Start representative at 3 critical points during the first year after release from active duty. Priority contact is made with those who had a mental health appointment during their last year of active duty. In response to COVID-19, VA leveraged information provided by DOL to tailor these call scripts to address employment-related challenges and then to refer them for unemployment benefits information at the state level also. Our continued use of our programs such as VA Skill Bridge, economic development initiatives, the personalized career planning and guidance, and our public-private partnerships have been tailored to be delivered in a pandemic environment. VA is working to address the transition-related provisions of the Johnny Isaacson and David P. Rowe, MD, Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act of 2020. Section 3005 covers the Women's Health Transition Training, as mentioned earlier. Section 4302 was successfully implemented the 1st of April 2021. It increased the annual funding for veterans technology, known as VetTech, and it expanded eligibility. Section 4304 requires VA to establish a grant program, and we are working internally to determine the appropriate course of action to gain the required grant authority and all that is needed to stand up a new office. And lastly, the one-year TAP assessment as outlined in 4305 and the TAP 5-year longitudinal study as outlined in section 4306 will commence for us once the funding has been conveyed to the contractor. So regarding the 5-year study, VA plans to leverage its already current post-separation transition assistance program, affectionately known as PSTAP, outcome study with modifications to meet this requirement. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and we will be pleased to respond to any questions you or other members may have.
Thank you, Ms. Rawls. With that, I will recognize myself for questions, and I'd like to start with Mr. Rodriguez. I want to thank you for your written testimony regarding DOL's 3-phase approach to implementing the Mulder off-base transition pilot provision that we passed in the Isaacson-Rowe legislation. You noted that the 3rd phase is intended to serve the employment needs of reserve component members. Could you please provide more details about this phase?
Thank you for the question, sir. And I think that's important to obviously highlight the fact that the reserves also have unique needs when they are transitioning out. One of the things that we do know is that based off of, again, as their unique needs, is that they also have unique requirements that DOL can support. One of the things that we want to do is make sure that they have access to virtual TAP and, when available, in-person TAP as well. So they have the capacity to utilize both of those resources.
And if you could go back to the 3 phases, what's the timeline to implement each phase?
So we're currently working on that as a pilot. One of the things that we know we're going to continue to gather information throughout the period of that pilot. And we're looking at the end of Q2 to have that fully instituted.
Thank you. Another Mulder provision we passed in Isaacson-Rowe was providing DOL and VA with access to the National Directory of New Hires operated by HHS. And Mr. Rodriguez, I was glad to read in your written testimony that DOL is developing an MOU with HHS to access this data. Can you please share more details on the status of the MOU as well as DOL's plan for utilizing that data once it's shared?
So we are definitely on track right now to finalize that MOU. We have been gathering input from various agencies to ensure that we have the right ask within that MOU. One of the things that we know is that based off of how we utilize that MOU is going to be important to how we capture data. And then we plan on having that information prepared and ready to go by second quarter of FY 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Ms. Rawls, is VA working on a similar MOU?
Sir, I am not familiar with that, so I would like to have Dr. Pierce respond to that question.
Thank you. Chairman, we work very closely with DOL, and we have monthly meetings with respect to collaborating. So with respect to that MOA, if there is equity there, we will definitely sign off and collaborate with them on that particular MOA. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. Mr. Mansell, I want to thank you for explaining in your testimony how DoD pivoted the delivery of TAP during the pandemic. And Based on the testimony of the VSOs, I am concerned that some transitioning service members have simply slipped through the cracks and have not received the critical counseling that TAP provides. Let me ask you this. What steps has DoD taken to ensure that all transitioning service members participate in TAP, whether virtually or in person?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. I would say that DoD uses and leverages communications through the governance process and through the various processes involved in the transition assistance program, and particularly at installation level. When a service member is ready to transition and they put in their retirement request or separation request, then that triggers a communication from the appropriate DoD agency at installation level to the service member. That is working reasonably well, I believe, and so I think that's something area that we probably have to take another look at to do a little bit better. But we do have a process in place, sir, to start, to take that on.
So then do you disagree with the proposition that folks have slipped through the cracks during the pandemic?
So I don't necessarily disagree with the proposition. I think there is a process in place. I think, as with anything, it can be improved. And I want to just say a little bit about myself, I guess, before I go any further, so I can help to answer this question a little bit better. I've been in this position for about 5 weeks, so that means I'm not a subject matter expert in anything right now. But what I do know is that I have a great staff behind me. The Military Civilian Transition Office. I have a great relationship. We're working a great relationship with our interagency partners. And I know that through that process, we will get the information that we need to make evidence-based decisions to continue to move the process forward. What I know today, sir, is what I've told you in terms of there's a process in place. We need to take a look at it to make sure that it's better. Yes, sir.
Well, I appreciate that. And if you could circle back with your colleagues and perhaps provide some follow-up to the committee and some assurance that appropriate steps are being taken to ensure that all transitioning service members are participating in TAP, I think we'd be very grateful for that. Is that reasonable?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. More than reasonable.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Fair enough. With that, I'd like to recognize my colleagues for their questions, and I'd like to begin with our ranking member, Mr. Moore.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mansell, this is a question also for you. Once it's determined that in-person training is indeed safe at an installation, will the department insist that installations return to in-person training to be the default modality?
So thank you for that question, sir. So today, about 83% of the DoD installations are now open. There's a specific readiness criteria that determines when an installation opens up. And about 83% of them are now open. And as they open, we are transitioning from virtual to in-person training. So what's happening now is we have about 4 different techniques now for presenting the information to service members. In-person, which is the preferred method, and we are transitioning to in-person training as the installations open up. The virtual format, which is the second preferred motion, and then there's a hybrid type, which is both methods. We have some installations that do the hybrid and the in-person approach. Then, of course, there's the asynchronous level, which is essentially the learning management systems, which is probably the least preferred of all of those. But those are the 4 techniques that we have right now. We are transitioning to in-person as the installations open up.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. We certainly encourage that. I think it's more effective. The next question I have, y'all apologize. I got an ag committee going on over here too, so I'm trying to do 2 at once. But hopefully I don't ask the ag question in here in this Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Chairman. That would be terrible. Anyway, one question for Ms. Rawls. When the VA's TAP briefings went fully online and students, what happened to the contractors that were teaching TAP before COVID? What did y'all do with those?
Thank you very much, sir, for that question. Those contractors began to do one-on-one sessions, as I mentioned. And so they put out the information on the installations that while we were not talking it with individual groups, that we were still open for business for those one-on-ones to be done. And I do believe that we were able to conduct over 46,000 one-on-ones.
So how many employees do you think we have supervising in this contract right now? How many VA employees?
If I want to Thank you for the question. I want to make sure I understand. You're asking about the oversight of the contract, how many individuals that we have for
How many employees do we have actually working in that contract itself?
To cover all 332 installations. I do recall that we had close to 1,300, but I want to call in Dr. Pierce to get the exact number. As I've been in this space now for a couple of weeks, it's all coming back to me. But Dr. Pierce, can you give us the exact number of benefits advisors that we have that are covering the installations?
Yes, ma'am. So, and I make sure I'm capturing that question correctly. You're asking for the benefit advisors. That's a total of 260, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield my time back.
Thank the ranking member. You can ask agriculture questions. You can ask whatever you like, Mr. Moore. It's your time. Appreciate it. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Pappas for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. I appreciate the comments of the panel here. This is important to understand what has transpired over the past year. And I think we've got to look at some of the best practices from this virtual TAP programming and figure out what makes sense moving forward. One question I wanted to ask is about the issue of homelessness, which is obviously a longstanding priority of this committee. And I think it's important that we screen for housing insecurity during the transition process, but we know that the stigma surrounding housing and financial instability can make it difficult for veterans to self-identify the needs that they have in these areas. And I'm wondering, Ms. Rawls and Mr. Mansell, if you could talk a little bit about how DoD and VA can work together to ensure that service members who are transitioning do have stable housing.
Okay, Ms. Rawls, do you want to start or you want me to take that on first?
How about I start and then you can close it out, sir?
Okay.
Thank you very much for the question. VA and DoD worked to establish what we call a warm handoff program in which those service members who have been deemed to have additional needs are identified early on in the transition process within that year and are directly referred to VHA. And so they can get whatever mental assistance that they need. And we also work to fold in conversations around the places that they are going to finally settle to see what type of housing availability is there to prevent homelessness. Over.
Mr. Mansell.
The only thing I would add to that, I think Ms. Rawls' response was very comprehensive, is that there is a capstone process as well as we go through the 5-step transition assistance program. And that capstone process is very important as well, because that's where the commander of that service member actually has an opportunity to take a look at the status of the career readiness or the career readiness status of each specific individual that comes through. And the commander is ultimately responsible, as he or she should be, to ensure that that service member is ready for transition. And if they're not, then the warm handoff that Ms. Rawls talks about can happen at that particular time, or it can happen at other times as well. But critical to all of this is that last step, the capstone. And I think that's very important in the process as well.
Well, thanks for identifying that. I'm wondering if I can stay with you, Mr. Mansell, for a minute.
Yes,
I've heard a lot about the importance of apprenticeships in the transition process. They're a really great way for service members to develop valuable skills, earn the necessary certifications they need to start civilian life off on the right track. One partnership that I want to highlight in my district is between Fort Drum and the White Mountain National Forest through SkillBridge. This program is a great partnership. I've had the opportunity to see it up close, and the Forest Service provides transition service members with housing and job skills to prepare them for post-service opportunities. So I'm wondering how we can strengthen opportunities like this. I've heard from the Forest Service that they've encountered some roadblocks because SkillBridge is mostly geared toward partnerships with private companies. I'm wondering if DoD is interested in expanding a partnership like this with the Forest Service, and what kind of value you feel it has for transitioning service members.
Okay. Thank you for that question, sir. As I indicated earlier, I'm relatively new to the circumstances, to the job here, but I'm very familiar with SkillBridge and what it does, the great opportunities that it offers. in terms of providing apprenticeship, internships, and employment training for service members. SkillBridge today is currently operating in about 100 different locations. We have 700 different agencies that actually work with DoD, VA, and DOL on the programs. And in 2020 alone, over 14,000 service members went through the program. So the program doesn't necessarily fall under my operation today. It's really more on the policy side and the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. There is some dialogue about it transitioning over to my area as well, where it would be integrated in with the program. So we think it's very important. We support it, and we will certainly work with our friends over on the policy side to ensure that it continues to move forward.
Well, that's terrific, and I'd like to follow up with you and perhaps give you a little bit more detail on the experience that the Forest Service has been seeing, and whatever we can do to make it easier for organizations and businesses to partner with SkillBridge, I think is a great opportunity for veterans. So thanks for those comments. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Pappas. I'd now like to recognize Representative Mace for 5 minutes.
Hey, good morning, everyone. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. I want to thank everyone, our panel, for participating. These issues are so critical right now, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. And I have almost everyone in my family is either active duty right now. Some are transitioning out. Some have already transitioned. And so I know secondhand, not firsthand, how critically important these issues are today. So my first question is going to be for the entire panel who is with us this morning. Briefly, in a few sentences, what is the biggest challenge that each of your organizations are facing regarding TAP? And then how can we, how do you believe those issues, that issue, your number one issue, can be resolved?
I'll start if my colleagues don't mind. I would say the biggest issue facing DoD today, I would say, is data.
Data.
Yes, ma'am, data. We have a lot of information on the period of time leading up to the time that a person actually transitions. But what we don't have today is data that talks to what happens to that service member after they transition. And I think that's very important. In our annual report to Congress, we talk about data and the data needs that we have. Last year in the 2020 edition, it was in Appendix J as well. And so I would say there are data for external organizations to help us better ascertain how we did as a service member was moving up to transition, because I've heard from everybody talking earlier, we do reasonably well, I think, in getting up to transition, but we really don't have the data that tells us how a service member has done afterwards. We can't really tell how well did we do. And so that type of data is what's needed, I think. For example, Social Security Administration, IRS, information such as that from those organizations would help us. And that was more than a couple of sentences. I thank you.
No, that's okay. Well, it's just a follow while you're on that comment. Is there any effort currently today to try to collect some of that information, or is there no ability to do that right now?
That's a great question that we need to work on.
Okay.
Yeah, we have had some conversations.
Yeah,
we have had some conversations, but we could certainly use the help of the committee to help move that forward for us.
Yeah, that's great. And does anybody else on the panel would like to comment on their largest challenge and then potentially what might be a resolution?
Yes.
So this is, go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to echo. It's not only the data platforms, it's the data sharing for sure, and relationships with public-private partnerships. And for us, it's about finding that sweet spot in delivering the message so people can retain the information, because we know this is a lot.
Gotcha.
Add to that, Congresswoman, is that one of the challenges that I think was spoken by the earlier panel was that veterans still have to figure out what they want to do when they are transitioning out. And that is a challenge, even as someone, when I transitioned out, was still consistent today. And we know that we have tremendous amount of resources with all of the agencies listed here, but getting those resources to meet somebody's individual needs when they are transitioning out, it will continue to be a challenge. So having the ability to identify what they want to do when they transition out is really important, because we can then identify resources that meet those specific needs.
Gotcha. And then I also had a question for Captain Stevens. Understanding that it's difficult for DoD to replicate the your 3-month transition program, what are maybe some potential critical elements that you believe should we try to incorporate from your program into yours to help improve the transition process?
Ma'am, for the question. I believe working on the first phase of our program, which is all about purpose and the strategy of defining who you are first as a person, what makes you tick. I think that is the critical element that is currently missing. Our phase 2 of the program is all the tactical tools that complements what the transition assistance programs do. But I really think going back to that phase 1 of defining purpose, what makes you tick, what's going to make you happy, and building a narrative in an incredibly professional manner.
Great. And Mr. Chairman, I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Mace, for your questions. I'd now like to recognize Representative Cawthorn for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the witnesses for your great testimony. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening. But Mr. Manziel, my question for you is, in your testimony, you state that from March 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021, vets conducted approximately 4,500 in-person workshops that catered to 71,000 participants and 4,500 virtual workshops that catered to 83,000 participants. One, I'd like to, that's an incredible statistic. But my question for you is, how many workshops were held in the year prior to the pandemic, and how many veterans did the workshops cater to?
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Representative Cawthorn. I will have to take that one for the record. That's one I just can't answer, sir.
Okay. Well, then, can I follow up on that question then? And maybe if you can answer that. We all know that not everyone thrives in a virtual environment. And as our economy starts to open up, when will you start to resume to all in-person workshops?
So that process has already started. As I indicated earlier, about 83% of the DoD installations are now open. Their readiness status is green. As those installations open up based on CDC, local and state guidelines and stuff, installations open up, and we're able to make the transition from the virtual format to the in-person format, and that is actually happening today. I can't give you exact figures, but I can tell you that it is actually happening today.
Well, it's extremely encouraging to hear. I know the veterans in Western North Carolina will be extremely happy to understand that. So, Mr. Manziel, thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative Cawthorn. Do we have any other members? I don't think we do. So if there are no further questions, we can bring this hearing to a close. I thank our witnesses who have joined us today. I thank our ranking member. You know, we're excited to hopefully move the provisions of 7105 that we worked hard to get across the finish line in the last Congress and sign into law this past January. We're really hoping that we move this forward quickly. As you know, a lot of the provisions in there were specifically designed. Our intent was to roll them out during the pandemic to try to help our veterans during this pandemic. So I'm hopeful that that'll be the case. With that, all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include additional materials. And without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.